So my latest blog is about micromanagement. And this is one of those words I want struck from the lexicon of commercial language because it doesn't really mean anything. It's just an explanation of a feeling that an employee or a manager has. Because I've seen people accuse their bosses of micromanaging if they walk past their desk. And conversely, I've seen people subject to all sorts of policies and procedures and checklists and reporting who just go about their job without complaint. And I will say that on balance, I find people that accuse their bosses of micromanaging more often than not tend to be either poor communicators themselves or not performing particularly well. And conversely, when I meet managers who say they don't want to micromanage their staff, that's an excuse for them chronically undermanaging people. And I'll include myself at some points in that number. So let's have a talk about it. So in another classic Dave corporate cock-up, I had to engage a consultant to help me do some systems analysis work. It was a big piece of work, it's £50,000. And we finally got someone that had the right skills, experience and availability. But if I'm honest, I didn't really like him. So as a result, I spent a limited amount of time, no more than 1 hour, sort of scoping out the piece of work for him, and then left him to get on with it and left others to kind of manage him. And about 3 months later, a draft report arrived on my desk, and I remember opening it up, beginning to read it, and feeling like sick to the stomach when I realised that he'd gone in completely the wrong direction. And I felt sick to the stomach because I knew that was my fault. And it was then a week of burning the midnight oil with me and my team to try and turn the report into something that was usable and useful. And my boss still wasn't best pleased even after all of that. So when I'm working with people in my leadership programs now, one of the things I make clear to them is not their job to motivate people. It's their job to put in place a framework of management that people can step into and motivate themselves. And I refer to that as the clean action framework. And it has 5 simple components to it. Number 1, there has to be a very clear outcome. Number 2, there has to be a very honest assessment of the starting point in terms of resources and knowledge that we can begin to use. Number 3, there has to be a clear plan of action or a process by which we're going to get done what needs to be done. Number 4, there has to be an obstacle assessment. We have to think about any real or potential barriers to getting the job done and try to clear as many of them out as we can. And finally, there has to be some level of measurement protocol so that we can work out if we're on track to deliver what we're supposed to deliver and if it's delivering the types of outcomes that we want. In other words, the clean action framework is good management. And the extent to which we have to go into detail on what that framework is and how to design it is based on a balance of 3 things. The first one is the balance of trust between the manager and the employee. And that, if we're going to do that properly, that has to be grounded in previous experience and the level of skills and knowledge that the person has. Secondly, it's the balance between the degree of autonomy that we want to give the employee and the need for the manager, who is ultimately responsible for the outcome, to retain a level of control. And thirdly in the mix is the need for consistency and accuracy of execution, particularly if there are risks associated, so that if something goes wrong, it could have a bad outcome. And my experience is people are just not very good at designing and implementing these management frameworks. And also couple that with the fact they're just not very strong at managing people and setting people up to step in and motivate themselves. So they end up either half-arsing the job, or even worse, they end up doing it themselves and use that old adage that, it's much quicker if I just do it. So if anything, I don't think managers are managing enough. And the impact of that is felt in the lack of motivation, the lack of engagement and the lack of performance of the people that we're delegating to. And that ultimately, of course, affects the outcome, but it also affects the well-being of the employee. So perhaps it's time to stop all this nonsense about micromanaging and instead focus on training leaders so that they can set these management frameworks up well and actively manage people in a way that motivates and inspires them to deliver the outcome.